All it took to put a South Florida parking lot underwater last fall was the Atlantic Ocean's high tide. Well, parts of the nearby Keys stayed flooded for nearly 3 straight months. An estimated 150 million people live on land that will be below the high tide line just 30 years from now. Fighting the tides can seem hopeless, but Brook Silva-Braga is back from one community that's come together with a unique effort. Brook, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Well, just look at a map and you'll see Norfolk, Virginia is surrounded by water. The land barely rises above sea level and the sea level is rising. So in Norfolk, flooded streets and front yards have become a way of life. But now, after years of fretting about that flooding, a group of ordinary people has come up with a novel response.
The water comes up from Collie Bay into the street.
You see it just flowing right now. It's flowing right into your yard.
Yep.
And as the tide rose, the water kept creeping toward John Bluming's house, which now sits on stilts.
After I bought the house, I realized it was a common occurrence.
After you bought the house?
After I bought the house.
How much of a financial surprise was that?
About $90,000 to lift it up.
Low-lying Norfolk has always faced flooding from hurricanes, like Isabel back in 2003. But what we saw in John's front yard is something different.
When the tide comes up, we get a little flooding.
Seawater brought to land by nothing more than a high tide.
It could be a sunny day like today.
Sharon Bean lives by the water here, too. She told us the house can still get flood insurance. They just had to cut power to the outlets on the ground floor.
I think it's worse in the fall.
Then she showed us videos of kayakers paddling down her street and her dog, Han Solo, floating in space above the same wall where we were sitting. And in a year, that happens how many times?
Oh, I would say maybe 26.
26 times?
Yes.
It's up here all the time.
It's a lot.
The U.S. government says globally the sea level has risen more than 3 inches in just the last 25 years. And because of things like erosion and ocean currents, some places have faced more rise than others. Norfolk has evidence of that, thanks to a tidal gauge dating back to 1927.
Since Sewell's Point gauge in the city of Norfolk was installed there near the naval base, it's raised by nearly 1.5 feet.
Derek Loftus, a researcher from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, says that 1.5 feet of change comes not just from the water rising, but also because overdevelopment of Norfolk's marshy soil has been sinking the land. We think this will get worse, or we don't really know?
By the year 2050, we're kind of expecting an increase of somewhere between 0.7 to 1 foot of water.
Another foot higher.
Yeah.
You say that so calmly.
Yeah, we've been researching it for years, so I feel like I've known this for a while,
But resignation in Norfolk may be as common as water in the streets.
You can see it's a continuation of a sidewalk.
At least that's how it felt to Dave Mayfield 3 years ago as he wrapped up a career as an environmental journalist for the local paper.
I was feeling a bit depressed. We're seeing flooding more and more. People are being inconvenienced.
And yet nothing happens.
Yeah, nothing happens. I wanted to do something that might make a difference, at least in helping engage people.
So Mayfield got an idea. He knew each fall the alignment of the moon, earth, and sun cause what's known as a king tide, an otherwise normal high tide that's especially strong and, more importantly, predictable.
We would get as many people as possible out on one day to measure an unusually high tide, have their data crowdsourced into a model improving flood forecasting.
He partnered with a group that had developed a tide mapping app and dubbed the event Catch the King. To his surprise, more than 700 people turned out.
We've got high tide in about 30 minutes.
Guinness certified it as the world's largest ever environmental survey.
I think what I underestimated was the innate desire of people to be part of something larger that might result in something good.
There have now been 3 annual Catch the King events, and the idea has inundated other parts of the calendar. If the tide charts call for flooding in coastal Virginia, you'll probably find a mapper at the high water mark.
So what we do is we walk along the waterline at high tide, and about every 5 feet, we press a button, and that records our exact location on the GPS. And here's what I've done today.
That's the outline of the water.
Yes, every place that I have stopped and push the app.
Mappers like Bill Weary have now pushed the app tens of thousands of times.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at the data that's coming in there.
Their readings end up in the hands of researchers like Derek Loftus.
It tells us whether our model's right or wrong, which scientists live and die by. Also, what's particularly useful is it helps us find areas for potential improvement. For example, most of the flooding you'll see today is due to storm drainage systems.
And as Mayfield hoped, more than anything, it's given ordinary people a way to do something about a problem no one person can do much about.
Although we can't stop the tides, eventually some sort of preventative action is going to be, well, it is needed. And the more and more data that scientists have, I think the better we'll be able to prevent the tide from causing harm to the neighborhood. May it all come out of what we're doing.
The unusually high tide that we might see on our annual project day for Catch the King is going to be a routine high tide not many decades from now. So we provide, I think, a window into the future.
One offshoot of this project has been taking water samples when the tide comes up because it kind of marinates in whatever is on the land. A professor from Old Dominion University, Dr. Margie Mulholland, found that in a single king tide, an entire year's worth of runoff pollution is being deposited into the Lafayette River.
That's another big part of it, the pollution.
Lots of concerns, and obviously people, they're changing the way they go about their lives, having to park on a side street if they have to go to work in the morning.
And I'm glad you talked about how expensive it is for folks to raise their homes, because these are massive expenses when you're doing that, $100,000, $200,000.
Yeah.
Very interesting story, Brooke. Thank you very much.
Thank you.